Usually you'd see a fan hub and frame from the interior, but now all you see is the RGB illumination and the fan blades, which is pretty neat. I know other companies have already done this, but it's pretty cool to see those pre-installed. Now this rear connector feature is really easy to implement on the case side of things, because all you really need to do is make a larger cutout right behind where those connectors are, and that's pretty much it. The connectors can then pass through. You can also see as well on this case, there are the usual 24 pin and 8 pin cutouts, so that you can actually use it with a normal motherboard down the road if you plan to. Speaking of motherboards though, that's where this gets really interesting. Here I've got the B650M Project Zero, also from MSI. Something that I didn't realize until I saw this firsthand was that every connector on this board is on the back. Not just the main power plugs, but every single fan header and RGB header, they are all completely hidden from the front. Now, not only is this more visually appealing from the interior, not to see all of these unsightly fan headers and stuff like that, but it's actually way more functional too. There have been times where I've mounted the motherboard in the case and then installed a large tower air cooler like a Noctua NHD15. Some of these fan connectors are literally impossible to access. So having them all accessible at the top here, on the side, down here, that is so much more functional compared to, trying to reach around a CPU cooler or underneath your GPU down here, for example. Another really cool thing about this layout is that you could be using the ugliest, most basic set of power supply cables instead of build like this, which usually you'd have to spend 100, 150 bucks on a cable mod extension or replacement kit. That stuff gets pricey, especially if you haven't factored it into your build, whereas with this layout, it literally doesn't matter. Now, something that I'm actually not a big fan of here, but it's this integrated fan and RGB hub for the pre-installed fans. It is just an absolute mess. I mean, how are MSI gonna make this clean, minimal case, but then ship it with this abomination? I know it's not visible, you can't see it, but it is still part of the experience, and yeah, it is an absolute jungle back there. I am not a fan at all. This actually ties pretty nicely into my next point, which is that MSI did send me an AIO to put in this build, but I'm actually not going to use it for these same reasons. There are cleaner or cable-free solutions out there, like this Corsair Link 360. I mean, if we really want to make this build as clean as possible with minimal wiring, in terms of liquid coolers, I think this is probably one of the better options out there. The fans are all connected with pogo pins, which dramatically cuts down the amount of cables needed, and where you'd also have a bunch of different cables pouring out of the pump block, here you have none at all. There is some hidden wiring through the hoses, which you can barely see, and there are still a couple of visible cables near the radiator that need to be connected, but for the most part, all of the main connections can be done completely out of sight, and it's still very simple and straightforward. There is one more piece to the puzzle, of course, which is the GPU, and that's where this build kind of falls apart, or at least gets a little bit more frustrating for me, because we still have this visible connector. Otherwise, there are no real visible wires in this entire build. Now, I did 3D print this, which is basically just a simple cable guard which covers that front 16-pin connector. It also works as a bit of a GPU support as well. But does it improve things? Honestly, I don't really know. I don't really think so. It definitely hides the cable, but it's not an ideal ultra clean solution. What would be ideal here would be a rear-facing connector at the back of the graphics card, and I have seen a few GPUs out there with that. I tried so hard to get one for this build, but I just can't find them available anywhere, even internationally. I do think though, by the time next Computex rolls around, this will likely be one of the more trendy, newer things on display, and hopefully there is even more hardware to choose from, new motherboards, new cases, and hopefully new GPUs as well. So this is my Audi RS3. It's not stock, I've actually done quite a lot of work to it, but the best thing that I've done to it by far is under the hood. There you'll find a massive carbon fiber air intake from a company called Venturi. The reason that I went for that specifically is Because it has the largest diameter tubing and the smoothest paths for airflow. In other words, it provides the least amount of restriction to that turbo 5-cylinder engine. Directional airflow. Like, this is a pretty typical mid-tower PC. We've got a couple intake fans at the front, pointed generally at the stuff in the middle. I want these paths to be spot on. If I front and another 60 somewhere, the heatsink, and take here, took the hand, there is a small gap between it and the cooler, but I mean, honestly, I think it's close enough to keep moving forward. The GPU vents, on the other hand, are going to be much harder, and that's because the GPU intake vent needs to be massive. The plan here is to channel all of that cool air from that bottom intake up towards the 4090, but as you can see, it's pretty big. Too big, in fact, for my 3D printer. So I actually need to split this one up into 2 pieces, print them separately, and then join them together. This one as well doesn't really have any areas for mounting, so the plan is to just use double-sided tape. Now, one side of the 4090 FE cooler design is a blower, so our airflow there is taken care of, but we do need to make a vent for that exhaust fan. And for this one, I did experiment with curved paths, which would allow us to make a curved vent, but to be honest, it just didn't look that great. For this one as well, we do need to make enough clearance for those memory DIMMs and even that 24-pin cable, which does poke out a bit, as well as work around that massive CPU vent. So yeah. And the look of the build as well is super, super unique. You know, it gets me excited because this is mostly a performance upgrade. The amount of air that is being without our intake and exhaust vents, it sits at about 75 degrees. Big difference with a noise reduction as well. When we take a closer look though, things get even more interesting. We have an 8-degree drop on the GPU hotspot as well. That's actually only a couple degrees warmer than what you'll see on an open test bench. Those temperatures in a glass mid-tower case GPU, our CPU basically didn't see any drop tests like rendering, and a bit more. I ended up flipping the remaining 2 case fans, so now we have a complete top intake front exhaust setup, and also played around with the fan speeds a little bit too. I solved the problem. I guess previously there was like hot air recirculating back into the CPU cooler vent or something, because now our CPU temps on average get a 10-degree drop. What's more impressive though is that our hottest CPU core previously, also known lower clock speeds. Now though, that hottest core is in the mid-worthy trade-off to keep our CPU much better off now, and I mean, we're still 6 degrees cooler than
Captain Happy?
I had my mic on, bro. Not gonna lie, I think I went crazy there, bro. About dog, about. Huh? Hold on, I finished. Bad guy. Mama.